Alessandro in the first row gets a little hangry, so we have to make sure we feed him. He's already told me to make it quick, so I will do that. But before I get started, just a few housekeeping things. This is a 25-minute session. I'll try really hard to finish a little early so that we can ask questions. Everyone is allowed to ask questions with the exception of the two right here, which is Alessandro and Felix. They've already told me they will heckle me, so I've asked security to stand by for these two. With that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, let's play a quick game. By show of hands, how many of you have ever forgotten your password in the last, he didn't even let me finish. Who's forgotten your password in the last month? Lots of hands, all right? Thank you for being so honest. I'm gonna throw a couple pieces of candy for those who've been honest. All right, Felix, you get one. I have China for you. Behind you. All right, guys, next question. In the last year, how many of you have had a fraudulent charge on your card? So just look around, all the hands that have been raised. That's exactly why we're here asking the question, why are we still using outdated methods to validate identity? I don't forget my face. It hadn't changed much in these years. My fingerprints, they don't change. So why are we still using that? So it's time for us to start making a shift. I'm gonna tell you a quick story. So about 2 months ago, I had a last-minute business meeting. I went online. I live in Georgia, so Delta is my airline of choice. I went to delta.com to book my flight, entered my credentials, and boom, decline. So my information is saved. I'm a frequent flyer. So I just assumed I must have put my CVV in incorrectly. So I tried again, boom, decline again. So I'm just like, okay, what's going on? All of a sudden, my mobile phone starts to go off, and it's a message saying, hey, we've seen some unusual activity on your card. Give us a call. So I call, going through all of that, and sure enough, even though the card is physically with me, someone has my information and has some fraudulent activity. So we close the card, we go through all the process, they send me a new card in the mail. In the meantime, I go back and I start to enter the information using a new card that I had. I was a little bit frustrated. I like my Amex points, couldn't get those points, but I can get some Discover points, okay. Go in, enter the Discover card information, and my flight price increased by $150 while I was dealing with that. I can talk about why that happens offline, but that does happen. In just a few minutes, it changed how much the price of the flight was, but it's also like, okay, come on, why am I having to deal with this today? So let's talk about the shift. There's been a paradigm shift in the way consumers do business, how commerce happens. A few little things we can look at today, $14.78 trillion. That's a projection for digital payments by 2027. $7.3 trillion by the end of this year alone will be e-commerce. And that's different. So if you think back in 2019, 13% of all online retail sales, that was it, 13%. Now it is doubled. 25%, and it's continuing to go up. That's not going to stop. So what are we going to do? Because we don't want commerce to stop. We want to be able to enable commerce. We want it to continue to happen. So that's the good news. We're enabling commerce. For the last 10 years or so, we've been pushing our merchants, we've been pushing the industry into a digital space. Let's go ahead and get more commerce. How do we do that? The digital shift happened, COVID. COVID is what pushed a lot of the industry, a lot of merchants into that digital transformation. The good news is it happened. The bad news is that fraud also happened. So the first number you see is $165 billion in chargeback. Hold on to that number, think about it, because later we're going to talk just what makes up that number. 80% of fraud happens. Why does it happen? It happens because passwords, they're weak. We're using them across multiple platforms. By show of hands, well, no, I won't ask you that. I'll just say I do it. I use the same password. I know it. I will shame myself. I should not do it. I've been in payments entirely too long. But because I cannot remember 50 different passwords, I think I have a really strong password. So why not use it everywhere? That's exactly what fraudsters want us to do. And 80% of hacks happen because of weak passwords. $500 billion in fraud losses. Now look at that. 500 billion versus 165, and I'm sure you're scratching your head and saying, okay, that doesn't correlate. But that's not just payment fraud. Those are phishing schemes, that's crypto fraud, it's everything that is happening in financial services. And yes, that matters to us, because if there's fraud happening in other places, it impacts us in the payments world. So we have to pay attention to what's happening around us. That's very important. All right, I'm giving you the good. We continue to have commerce happen. We are showing and shifting it. We're seeing the increase. Merchants are finding unique ways to do business. We're giving them solutions in order to do it. But the dark side of it. The dark side of payments is $48 billion in fraud losses. And this is just digital payments for 2025 is projected. $1. So remember we talked about the 165 in two earlier slides. The $165 billion in chargebacks, but $1, for every $1 in fraud losses, a merchant incurs $4 in loss. It is the chargeback fees, it's the interchange fees, it's the loss of goods and services, it's the loss of customers, and that is according to LexisNexis when they talk about what the total makeup of loss is. It starts with a single dollar and it balloons for that merchant. 3X, fraud growth. Card not present fraud has always surpassed face-to-face fraud. I'm not bold enough to go take Lissandra's card into an establishment and present it, thinking that I won't get caught or get in trouble. So where does that happen? It happens online, it happens digitally. It happens in a myriad of different ways. 3 times the growth is where we see that. And so if fraud is growing exponentially, and we have so many ways to report that fraud, CVV, two-factor authentication, SMS codes, but it's still happening. We have to ask ourselves why. I've given you the good news is that commerce continues to grow. We're doing phenomenal in payments. We see that. More businesses, Jody talked about it early in her opening remarks, how many new businesses and small businesses were opened. That's a great thing. So we're enabling. That is what we need to do for a strong economy. The bad thing is how it's happening as we move and shift to digital with the same old outdated technology. Then we start to see losses, which impacts us. We know what that impact is. But there is a solution. That's the good news. The good news is the solution is biometric authentication. Everyone wants to say, okay, well, we had passwords that stopped them for a while. We have CVV, it stopped them for a while. SMS codes stopped them for a while, but it kept coming back and kept growing. Why are you telling me that this is the solution? Well, I'll tell you why, and I'll give you some examples of where it's real life. 40% faster checkout. That is Whole Foods. Amazon once said they've reported that since they put home authentication into their facilities, they see a 40% faster checkout time. What does that mean? More customers, more repeat customers, because when it's an easy, simple way, then you're gonna come back. 80% reduction in fraud. Citi is reporting that their inbound, their call center, because they put voice biometrics into their call center, there's an 80% reduction in total fraud for them. Now, voice doesn't work everywhere. There's about 13 or so different biometric types. So based on who you are and the way you do business, the types of biometric that you're going to implement matters. 9 minutes. This one is important for me. 9 minutes. Delta reported because they are using face biometrics. They're boarding 9 minutes faster every flight. That's good when you need to get to where you need to go. If you live in Atlanta and go through TSA and it takes you about an hour to get to your gate, that may not be good because they may close the doors later. So for those in Atlanta, please make sure that you understand that they're doing this 9 minutes faster, so you may need to get to the airport a little bit faster. All right, the types of biometrics. Earlier I talked about there's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 13. You have iris, you have retina, you have gait, you have all these various types of biometrics. But the ones that impact us in payment specifically, that are really important, facial biometrics. That's one that we really think are important at Fortress. It is the most convenient and the most widely adopted. Why? We all have cell phones. I left mine in the back, but everyone has a phone in their hand, and about 99% of us open our phones with our face. I think the only two people who don't do that are my mother and father. That's it. Everybody else has a smartphone, and they use that smartphone to they use their face to open their phone. So since consumers are already doing that, that's a widely adopted method for payments. Palm recognition. Amazon One has done a great job in really forging that ahead. You've seen the statistics, you see how it's growing. They're continuing to really invest in Palm to make sure that it is absolutely secure, that it is frictionless, it's fast, and that is something that consumers will want to adopt. Fingerprint authentication. We use that at our banks. When I go in to get cash, and I do that probably once a quarter because when I travel, I like to give nice tips. So the only time I use cash is for travel with tips. So I have to go get 1s and 5s and 10s. And when I go inside to go do that, I use my finger to access my account. So ATMs, banks, that's where that is leveraged for us. But there are other ways in POS systems that are leveraging fingerprint. That's so important. Voice authentication. That one is harder in retail. It's just not the most widely adopted, but it works really well in call center. So there are payments being taken in call center. That is a way to ensure that when you take that payment in call center, that you're able to authenticate it. Now, all biometrics is not equal. Some are stronger than others. That's why you saw in the earlier slide the 80% fraud reduction. There are some biometrics where it's as high as 99.999996%. So depending on how it's implemented and which biometric it is still saving millions of dollars for merchants. Behavioral biometrics. That's one that a lot of people are still trying to wrap their arms around and get comfortable with. Like keystrokes. You see it often. Have you ever wondered why in the example I used, when I went to Delta to book the flight, there had already been fraud truly happening with my account. But there are times when there has been no fraud, and the way that I'm moving and behaving as a consumer is different than I've done in the past, and the bank will stop the card and will say, hey, just give us a call. We just want to make sure that this is you, because something is different. I know that you travel to Miami once a month. I know you travel here and there, but this looks a little different. You're on sites you've never been on before. Something is different. Is this really you? They're leveraging behavioral biometrics behind the scenes. Banks have been doing that for a very long time. So there are many types of biometrics. Just really lean into it because it is really important, because it helps us to eliminate the fraud that's happening as we look at the shift. Now let's talk about the security. I'm sure everybody's looking at me saying, okay, Menda, you talked about biometrics and the types of biometrics, but what about the security behind it? If there are breaches that's getting my card number, how are they not going to get my face? So I think that's a really important question because it's about how biometrics is implemented. So the very first one, you see a one-to-N match. What that means is, in some cases, and I'll use Apple Pay as an example, they're taking a picture of an image and they're storing that template. That's not the most secure biometric method to do it. Not knocking Apple Pay because it still is a good method, but it is absolutely not the most secure. Because what I learned from my nephew is if he just takes my phone and puts my phone in front of my picture, it opens up. I was like, oh my God, I did not know that happened. That's not a secure way to do it, but it's closed loop. So if you're one-to-N, what that means, it's data, it's zeros and ones going back into not just a single database, it's going into one that the only key to your biometrics is yourself. And if you're not giving that key away, no one's able to go and breach to figure out that this is Menda's biometric key, right? So there are ways for biometrics to be extremely secure. And it is not something we should be afraid of. The other things that are there are liveness. So if my nephew ever tried to do it again, leveraging the right technology implemented, he wouldn't be able to unlock my phone because it would know that's not a live person. Deepfakes. I've seen the mask everywhere. Put the mask on, it looks exactly like the person. Then let me open your phone. No. There's biometric, that biometric authentication around liveness detection eliminates that. So there's no more spoofing, deepfakes, photographs being used to leverage and to access your information. Age estimation. Now we're in Vegas, where age estimation from a gaming perspective is important. So you think about the verticals where that matters most. To be able to authenticate, to say, okay, I know what Menda's biometric was when she was, let's just say, a little bit younger. Is it still the same for her now today? The technology is amazing because it still can identify who I am as I continue to age. But it also identifies that, my nephew trying to access something, he's not 18. This is a site he absolutely can't be on. So it's important that all of those pieces from a security standpoint, as you go out to find the right biometric vendor and the right relationships, you're asking those questions. How do you store the data? Is it a one-to-one match? A one-to-nil match? Ask that matters. Ask if you're doing liveness and age estimation, that matters. So there is an absolute secure way to ensure that no information is able to be breached. That's really key and important. The last piece is the customer adoption. Now we know in the US it takes a little bit of time for us to adopt new technology. If I were to have a graph up here today, and what we talk about always, is that first the innovation happens and is implemented in Asia. It goes from Asia to Europe, from Europe to LATAM, from LATAM to the US. So we're usually the last to implement a lot of this technology. This technology and the way we've talked about it today has been implemented for years in other places. And we're still trying to grapple with, should we do it? And the answer to that is absolutely yes, because your customers demand that we use it. When there is poor adoption, it's typically because we haven't done the education. So educating our customers is really important to ensure that they understand your information is secure, your biometrics are secure. No one is going to breach that. So we've talked about the different kinds, what's best in contact center, what's best in retail, and all those various things. What I say is the future of biometrics isn't coming, it's already here. I'm sorry I didn't leave time to ask questions. 25 minutes went by really, really fast. But what I will say is that If you have questions and you want to have a conversation and learn more about it, we're more than happy to have a conversation with you in booth 925, the Fortress Payments booth. Thank you so much.